so early in the morning on what looks like, looking out the window, a pretty beautiful autumnal morning. Just in case you haven't been before, 5 Things is a morning meetup where three speakers share 5 key takeaways from one of their favorite non-fiction books. And I hope you'll leave this hour, we'll go on till 9, either a little bit smarter, inspired to pick up one of the books we talk about today, or maybe just feeling a spot better about stuff. Either or is good with me. So a few bits of housekeeping before we kick off. This event is being recorded, though you won't appear unless you contribute. And if you could please stay muted while the speakers are on, that'd be great. We'll hopefully have around 20 minutes at the end to ask the speakers some questions. So if a question pops into your head whilst you're listening, just pop it in the chat. So last time on 5 Things, Alex talked about artificial intelligence. Danae blew our tiny minds with some fungi facts, and Seth shared 5 things from Make Brilliant Work. I'll just pop the link in the channel. All the 5 Things events are recorded, so you can catch up with them on that link there. Well, I think a couple of folks, if you could all press that big mute button on your Zoom interface, that'd be really helpful. Cool. So yeah, this is the 15th 5 Things, and we'll have explored, I think, like 45 books by the end of this event, which equates to 225 things, if I've got my maths right. That's a lot of things, and we've had some wonderful speakers along the way. Look at all those lovely faces. And as always, I'm delighted to add 3 brand new speakers to this distinguished group. So we will say hey to Alex, Mark, and Claire. Hey, Alex, Mark, and Claire. Hi. So first up today, we have Alex Porter-Smith, and she is co-founder and producer at High Tide, a video production company that collaborates with creative agencies to make high-end online video content. I think our clients include Glenmorangie, Just Eat, and Edinburgh Film Festival, as well as Free Agent. She's also a board member of CC Skills, and particularly passionate about supporting young people in the creative industries. Alex is going to share 5 things from Matt Haig's Reasons to Stay Alive. Alex.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
Cool. So yeah, thanks so much, Andy. Yeah, as Andy says, I'm going to be talking about Reasons Alive by Matt Haig. And before we start, I just wanted to let everybody know that before kind of April, May of this year, I really hadn't read any books at all, maybe 2 books, I think, since leaving school. I kind of hated it and didn't really understand why anybody enjoyed reading. So this was kind of a bit of a gateway book for me, as it were. I've read quite a lot since then. So I think that was, yeah, I just wanted to share that before. I thought this would be a really good one to get started on. Yeah. So it is a book about, it's a book that really throws you into the deep end, opening with an almost suicide attempt from the author Matt Haig when he's 24 in 1999 in Ibiza. And it was his depression and anxiety that are leading him to this event in his life. The story begins really this almost suicide attempt, and then when he and his girlfriend return to England to begin his recovery. And then the story kind of jumps all over the place, which I really enjoyed. It goes from his journey of his recovery, then he talks to his past anxious self, he educates us on his experience of depression, and he also shares his reasons to stay alive, which is really important. Yeah. Hold on, Andy, 2 seconds. We've got a little bit more to say on that one. So yeah, obviously this book is about mental health. And so most of my 5 things that I learned about this have given me an insight into my own mental health. I had a pretty hard COVID year for my business and my partner as well. And there was a lot in here that I really needed to hear at the time. So for each of the 5 lessons, I'm going to share a bit more about how I use the lessons in my own life for my own mental health. And actually around the same time, I was reading a book, or read a book quite quickly, called by Charlie Mackesy, and it's full of beautiful illustrations, but there's so many of the same themes across the 2 books, so I've actually included some of his illustrations in some of the slides, so just to not cause any confusion on that. So yeah, thing number 1. So thing number 1 is a pretty big one, and it really kind of hits you very early on in the book. So it's that people who have suicidal thoughts are no less scared of dying than someone who does not have suicidal thoughts. And yeah, this was really eye-opening for me. And it was, to be honest with you, it was something I never really thought about before. And Matt Haig explains that when society talks about people who have suicidal thoughts, often the phrase "wants to die" is bandied around quite a lot, but actually this is so far from the case. People who are in this situation are really scared of living and feel like they can't live anymore, and they actually want to die. And so this made me wonder how it must feel to be in this position, because I'm fortunate enough to not have been in this position, and how unimaginable this must be. And so I think for me in my day-to-day life, this has taught me just like a huge lesson of empathy, and it makes me really think about, like, now to stop and think if someone's behaving slightly differently, or maybe not differently. It just makes me think, like, what's really going on in this person's life, and can really have an impact on how I react. It's usually just taking a breath and being like, okay, we might not be seeing the whole picture here. And interestingly, it's also taught me to be quite empathetic with myself, which kind of seems a bit backwards, but you know, if I'm beating myself up or worrying about something, and now actually sit there and ask myself, like, what advice would I give to a friend in this situation? And that's helped me to kind of slow down a little bit, and actually just be a bit kinder to myself. And so I think this lesson has really taught me that you can actually be empathetic with others, and you absolutely should be more, because we just don't know what's happening in someone's life, and what a difference being empathetic to yourself can make too. So number 2. So it takes nano steps to climb a mountain. So Matt Haig talks about what a mammoth challenge it was for him to get to the little corner shop on the end of his parents' street, and when he particularly felt trapped in his parents' house during his recovery. And so to many of us, this seems like a tiny, you know, everyday task, but it's so clear that when he manages it, that it's what a huge hurdle it was for him in his recovery and getting there, and proving to himself that he could do it. And so for me, this kind of proved that, like, you know, it takes little steps to get somewhere. It's not, you might not always notice that you're taking a tiny step, and that it's absolutely okay to be at, like, the bottom of the hill, halfway up the hill, and it's okay to take steps backwards. It's okay to stay still, and about being really patient with yourself is actually the most important thing in it. And this is something I've learned to do a lot more since reading the book, especially at work. I used to be very like, I need to be in this situation in my career, I need to get this place. And actually now I'm beginning to really recognise those small wins, and actually the small parts of overcoming challenges as well. So that's been really, really refreshing for me since reading the book. So number 3, do what works for you. So throughout the book, Matt Haig explains that this story is his experience of depression, and it's not anybody else's, and he wouldn't want to speak for anybody else because it's individual to everybody. So he goes on to explain that pills really, really didn't work for him, and that actually taking them really worried him. So the best thing for him to do was not to take them, but he's absolutely not saying in any way, shape or form that nobody else should take them. He's not trying to preach that to anyone. And so he explains that what does work for him was yoga, reading, throwing him into something, and that it's absolutely individual to everybody. And this has been quite an eye-opener for me too. So since reading the book, I've been trying to build this more into my life a lot more. So some of the things I've been doing that seem really small but have had a really big impact on my life are not getting up in the dark in winter. I've completely cut out caffeinated coffee, which was a big one for me. I've got a positivity journal, and I spend a bit more time now alone doing absolutely nothing. And actually, when I really can't be bothered to cook, I've got a list of recipes that are really easy and quick for, you know, to be actually continue to be healthy even when you can't be bothered and you're too tired. So they're all things that maybe sound actually a bit superficial or simple, but these are things that have made a huge impact. And things that I used to really worry about, you know, so, you know, if I didn't get up early in the dark, I used to think people would think I was really lazy. And drinking caffeinated coffee, I was like really worried that I wouldn't be able to go on this coffee run with everybody. And then spending time alone, I constantly used to think people think I was boring. And so, yeah, that's been quite a tough thing to kind of just undo that. But all of those things are what really work for me. And yeah, having that, what works for me in small ways every day has made a huge impact on my life. So number 4, I think this is probably one of the most important ones, actually, that there's no shame in asking for help. So I feel the whole book and the whole story of Matt Haig's recovery is a series of him both asking for help, you know, when he's going through that journey of recovery, but then also giving help. So to his past self, when he has conversations with his past self, but to the audience who are reading the story too. And it's worth mentioning here that Haig speaks mostly about how men struggle with this in particular, and that men are 3 times less likely to seek help than women. So whilst it's a message for everyone, I think it's particularly important for men, this one. And this is actually a lesson or something that I believed in for a long time about asking for help. And it's something I told a lot of people to do, but I never really took the advice myself. So around the time of reading this, I had a couple of people that are really close to me who really needed some help, and I was really trying to give that help quite significantly. But what I didn't really realise that I wasn't asking for any help myself. And so by the end of the second lockdown, I was experiencing like very high levels of anxiety, and people had really started to notice that my behaviour had changed. And so I actually got some help with this, and it made a huge difference, and there was no shame in that at all. And so I think this is really one of the most important lessons of the book. And if you think you might need to ask for help, then it's really important you do, and could be life-changing. Now, what I would say is on the Charlie Mackesy illustration, that it is actually a really brave thing to do. I think it shouldn't be undermined just how hard it is to ask for help too. Yeah. And then number 5. So put time away to appreciate the small things in your life. Well, this is Matt Haig's like reasons to stay alive, really. So he talks about many things that he loves and appreciates, and many things that help him to come out of depression now when it begins to reappear. And so he also talks about how he actually appreciates depression, because it makes him understand what it is to be happy when he is not in a depressive state. And this kind of lesson is one I've taken very literally, and probably the one I do most often. I now have a positivity journal, and this is like, I usually spend sometimes a minute a day, or sometimes it can be up to 10 minutes just writing positive things down that have happened or that I've experienced. And so from the smallest things of like the sun is shining, I read a book, I finished the book, I now have clean bed sheets, that's always a good one, and to much bigger things like winning new business, a friend's got engaged, booked a holiday, that kind of thing. And this has kind of taught me gratitude in a whole new way, that you don't just have to recognise the big areas or big kind of wins to feel gratitude. It's much more about the smaller things, and little and often. So yeah, so those are my 5 things. So it's that people who have suicidal thoughts are no less scared of dying than someone who does not have suicidal thoughts. And that taught me a huge lesson in empathy. It takes nano steps to climb a mountain, and being patient with yourself is really important. Do what works for you. It's an individual experience for everybody. There's no shame in asking for help, and it's a hugely brave thing to do. And putting time away to appreciate the small things in your life can have a really big impact every day. So yeah, that's me.
Yes, thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll probably skip straight on to our next talk, but please, if anyone has any questions for Alex, just pop them in the chat. That would be really helpful, and we'll have a chat about some of those issues at the end. Cool, thanks, Alex. We'll move swiftly on to our second speaker of the day, Mark Gorman. Mark is currently the strategy director at Whitespace. He has over 30 years of experience in advertising design, digital and direct marketing. He's also run a stock market listed marketing service company, 1576. I didn't realize that, Mark. We must have worked very closely together a while ago. He's also the author of nearly 100 advertising and marketing effectiveness papers, including 3 IPA effectiveness Grand Prix. I think like the first, I'm sure Fran, my wife, won't mind sharing this, but the first time I think I met Mark as well was when he phoned me up saying that Fran had passed out whilst at an event. Is that right, Mark?
Yeah.
And then, oh, hello. So that was a good way to meet, wasn't it?
It was a bit traumatic.
Yeah. But everything was okay. Everyone was fine. So Mark is going to share the best bits from Feck Perfuction. Mark.
Thanks. Yeah, Feck Perfuction by James Victore. So I don't really do business books. I find them really pompous and really boring. And I don't think many of them have a great deal of substance. But this one is different. It's a collection of life stories, which he says come from psychology, sociology, and philosophy. And he's an American art director, designer and author, and he calls himself a creative warrior on his website, which is quite nice. And he runs a creative course in America for people who are trapped in what he calls a box of self-doubt, limiting beliefs, perfectionism, and worry. In his words, he helps them to kick ass. And I kind of like that attitude right from the off. So the point of the book really is that Victore believes that normalcy is barbed wire, in his words, to the human spirit, and questions are the wire cutters. So it's a book that shares dangerous ideas on the business of life, embracing creativity, a subversive tool for consciousness raising. And it comes in 6 chapters that might change your life, but that will definitely make you think of how successfully you're presenting yourself, your creativity, and your prospects. So what I think he manages in 71-page essays is to capture the nature of what it takes to rise from the ordinary in our own personal lives and allow creativity to drive our personal voice, actions, purposes, and habits. And it gives us strategies for starting out tentatively to achieve our dreams and our aspirations, and for overcoming our fears. And it acknowledges that kind of well-known fact that creativity is inherent in all of us, but driven out of children in order to conform and succeed. And it kind of celebrates weirdness in people. So it encourages you to take risks and not to conform. And although I'm not sure he actually sets out to be inspirational, but he certainly achieves it. Instead, he kind of sets out to get us to ask difficult questions of ourselves. So it's quite, rather than it being self-help, it's about self-challenge. And it challenges ourselves in 5 ways. So here goes. Thing 1, find your voice and use it. So he opens by saying, find your voice and use it. Have a damned opinion and go make something with it. Embrace your childhood weirdness, which for me is really just creativity that society, as I've already said, tries to drum out of us. Hence, you find teaching in schools pushes you towards STEM subjects. And it's why I think some of the work we're doing at Whitespace for an initiative called Daydream Believers is really important, which brings in school children from secondary schools and teaches them creativity, not art or English or writing or drama. It teaches you creativity and how to apply that in the business world to give them the belief that they can have a dream, a career, future career in creativity. So he talks about relishing not fitting in as your first glimpse of being great. So that's quite a quick one. Thing 2 is a bit longer. So thing 2 is to overcome fear, because fear is a professional stop sign. So I guess we kind of all know this, that the fear of failure is like a fire-breathing dragon that stops you making advances in your life. So every morning it breathes into your ear, failure, failure, failure. It's easy just to accept that. So he talks in one part about teaching people to ski. And a huge part of the learning process in skiing is falling over, and that's scary, it's failure. But if you don't get over that, you'll never get to the exhilaration of speeding down the ski slopes. So you need to accept that you'll fail a lot and just get over it. He gives a good example of a student who once asked him, "Mr. Victoire, I hear what you mean about taking risks in your career, but I've got rent to pay." And his response is, "Thomas, here is your tombstone. It reads, 'Here lies Thomas. He would have done great work, but he had to pay the rent.'" And I like that. He's got loads of little things like that in the book, which on almost every page there's something that brings you in, a little story that's involving. So he talks about perfection being a barrier to doing great work, because we seek perfection, but it's a head game that we play with ourselves. We set unobtainable goals that when we don't achieve them, we just drive ourselves into depression. And that's why I love the concept in our business of tissue meetings. So in these, we create multiple ideas. They're not adorned with beautiful garments. They're not crafted in any way. And then we kill them off one by one before we get too obsessed with them. They're not fodder, far from it. They're conversation. But once we land on an agreed solution, our favorite baby, if you like, then we can start to adorn it. And who knows, maybe perfection will emerge from that. So yes, you should strive for excellence and pay attention to detail, but perfection, Feck Perfuction, it gets in the way of progress. And you know what's better than perfect? Asked Victoire. Done. Done is better than perfect. So everyone can dance, right? Just not to perfection. But we don't dance because our ego doesn't want to be criticized for someone else's interpretation of your dancing ability. So I dance like a demented octopus. It's ugly. But when I dance, people love it because I don't care. And I think they get a little bit jealous that I just went for it. So what I'm doing there, I think, is I'm overriding my ego and just enjoying myself. So park your creative ego and you might actually achieve more. Admitting you don't know is the path to knowledge, maybe even wisdom. But again, that means suppressing your ego. So I love telling clients I don't know the answer or asking daft laddie questions. It makes them look bright and it makes you look humble. And I think that's a good starting point for relationships to grow from there. Here's another little nugget that I loved in his book. He says, bad art makes you go, wow, huh? Whereas good art makes you go, huh? Wow. So don't feed your audience fast food that has a big initial impact, a kind of wow, but leaves you dissatisfied. Go for the Michelin star restaurants that are like, huh? Wow. And great design is that too. So thing 3 is start. The first step's the hardest. We maybe all had the desire to start our own businesses, but at that point, most of us stop because fear and ego and lack of a voice stop us from doing that. So don't stop, start. Then learn to enjoy the struggle. The rewards will take care of themselves. It's never the right time. We're never ready. I always used to say when I ran my own business, I don't do plans. Plans just go wrong. But actually now I think I realize I meant that plans put barriers in the way. So just don't do them. What he says is assume success, which I really like. So to assume means to suppose to be the case without proof. So if you assume success, it makes you feel successful before you actually are. It sets you up and it gives you swagger and, as he calls it, chutzpah. And it makes us positive in our behavior. So ignore the external badges of success. That's why I like Strava. I don't know if anyone else uses that, but for me, I'm successful if I get a PB in a segment. Now, I might be 2,345th fastest in that segment, but I was a success and it made me feel good. So I move on and I move up bit by bit. One day I might be 1,345th. So that's success in your own eyes. The first rule of business, is it profit? Is it service? Is it longevity? Well, in Victoire's eyes, it's fun, because without fun, you're just one of the working dead. His father said to him, if you don't love what you do, then don't fucking do it, which seems fairly honest. So make yourself happy first. You probably constantly ask yourself what your clients want, but I think that's the wrong question, and so does he. The right one is, what do you want? Don't waste your efforts trying to please, to double guess other people, because your enthusiasm for the work you create and love makes you a beacon, attracting your people, your tribe, your audience, even clients. New puppies create a buzz. Their excitement's infectious. They're being themselves. You can't help but get a buzz off their buzz. So be yourself, have your buzz when you present work. Forget the company, the way they do it your way, and you'll create a vibrating energy that comes from truly believing in your creativity. You won't even have to sell it. Your vibrations will do that for you, just like the Beach Boys, good vibrations. So thing 4 is action, because action is the antidote to fear. Fear paralyzes you, paralyzes me, it paralyzes everyone. It shrinks your sphincter, it constipates your thinking, it stops all movement. This is quite a scatological chapter, I admit. So movement is the key to making your life happen. I mean, I work in advertising. Not one great idea I ever had was worth tuppence unless people actually saw it, unless we moved it forward, believed in it first, sold it second, invested in it third, made it fourth, and then bought some airtime so people actually saw it. And that needs conviction. And again, that word he uses, chutzpah. And I think my agency was quite fearless. We always assumed success and we sold success. And the simple fact is you can't be a mover and shaker if you're standing still. So go seek your muse, says Victore. He argues that great ideas don't come to you at your desk. That's not entirely true, but he does have a point. So he preaches going to places you love, like bars, and having ideas there because you're happy and you're with your muse. Just take a pen. And that's why at 1576, we bought a camper van and we stuck up on the side of it in kind of hippie type work in progress. And we sent our creative teams away in this van, away from the office, to work in the hills, to work in laybys and pub car parks, with pens, of course. And they often came back with great ideas. You also, another thing he says, you need to run away from comfort. He tells us of a stultified colleague of his who got home to see a massive ass divot in his sofa, total comfort, but also total complacency. Our desire for an easy life and settling is the enemy of creativity, in my view. We must never be comfortable. It's why I resigned from my role as owner and MD of my own agency. I was bored, and so I was no longer creative, and there was a great big ass divot on my leather desk chair. John F. Kennedy, Victore quotes again, he has a famous NASA speech in 1962, which includes the line, "We choose to go to the moon, not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills." And the creative life isn't an easy one. There's no getting away from that. The day it gets comfortable is the day you've given up. So another great line he has, if you want a pony, ask for a unicorn. If you don't ask, you don't get. Dream big. And he tells a nice story of an electrician father of one of his pals who, after doing a job, would sign the inside of the fuse box. When he was asked why, he said, an artist always signs his work. It's pride. Think like an artist. They always sign their work. He has got a good eye for quotes, I'll give you that. So like this one from Abraham Lincoln, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree and I'll spend 4 hours sharpening the axe. The point here, I think, is that preparation is everything. In my case, doing the research well to write a great creative brief so that my creative team can do great work. And as I said to a friend the other day, clients get the work they deserve. Most great ads come from great clients because they've thought deeply about what they were doing. They were sharpening the axe for me, for my creative team. Chapter 5 is probably the weakest of the 6. It's called Habits, but he only talks of one, which I totally agree with, which is stop deprecating yourself. One of the worst personal habits, apart from drinking, smoking, chewing my fingernails, swearing and farting I have, is self-deprecation. It can be sweet, but when you call yourself fat when you try on clothes, you only make yourself miserable. It's a bad habit, so lose it. Recognize your strengths and praise yourself, at least inwardly, for what you're good at. Also, take compliments. So I'll skip chapter 5 and onto my final takeout, which is thing 5 from chapter 6, which is about purpose. Most of us are lost. We take a job because a job becomes available. We move passively from one gig to another aimlessly. But the reality is we shouldn't think of ourselves as lost, but as seeking purpose in our lives. It's purpose that resolves every chapter in this book. So in the first chapter on voice, with purpose, we have a voice. On fear, we have no fear if we have purpose. Getting started, purpose gets us off the grid. And for action, purpose drives us forward. But to make purpose, we first must have a belief in something that will get us out of bed in the morning, making work that matters, that's meaningful, out of love. You've got more chance of doing that for yourself than for the dollar machine. It's why you must believe in yourself, why you must stop self-deprecating, why you must set goals, why you must sign your art. Be proud of your work so that you attract a following, win awards, get hired for better agencies, or strike out on your own. Purpose also engenders trust, and trust is priceless. A client that trusts you believes in you and gives you a chance. A client that trusts you is a good client, and clients get what work they deserve because they deserve it for trusting you. But you also must trust yourself. So trusting yourself is a total reevaluation of your worth and personal authority. He argues that it's fashionable to crowdsource opinion. And I think by that, what he means is people chase likes on social media. It's much harder to trust ourselves, but unless we exercise our instincts, we'll never learn to trust them. If you do trust yourself, you'll create purpose, and people are more likely to believe you because you'll have conviction. And as creatives, we constantly seek external opinion or approval. We ask people what they think of our work. Victore's stock answer to this is, it doesn't matter what I think of it, it's what you think of it. I think we ask opinion because we know something is wrong with the work, that there's a flaw. So be harder on yourself and honestly appraise your own work. If it's shit, you'll know it. You don't need someone else to tell you. And when it's good, we don't seek opinion. We fly it from a flagpole because we're proud of it. Remember, your work's a gift. That's why you're in the role that you're in. Cherish it, nurture it, believe in it. He asks us to ask ourselves of each job that lands on our desk, is this project a God job or a money job? And you need to recognize quickly which it is. And if it's a money job, just get on with it and get it done. Don't waste time worrying about it. At 1576, our two biggest clients were our least creative, but they paid all the bills, allowing us to spend more time on the God jobs that made us famous and attracted more money jobs. So our new business criteria were really simple. Will it make us money? Will it make us famous? Will it be fun? And 2 out of 3 were required. But if we put too much emphasis on the first of these, the making money, we knew we were doomed. So does Victore. So trust the bigger picture, follow your gut, follow your instincts, let money follow you. And I think that's a good place to end. So the 5 things: find your voice, overcome fear, start, take action, and find your purpose.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mark. Even some profound lessons in there, and maybe like one of the first 5 things, definitely the first 5 things, maybe the first event that has written "think sphincter" in caps in the chat. So thanks for that, Danny, for highlighting amidst all those profound statements as well. That's the one that stood out. So
yeah, a jobby bit.
Okay, we'll move. I certainly have like a ton of questions there, but we'll move swiftly on to our last speaker of the day, Claire. Claire does have a day job as a software engineer, but spends far too much time interested in urbanism. She's a planning convener for our local community council and is involved in a range of local and national campaigns to help make our towns and cities more livable, accessible, and equitable places. So Claire is going to share her 5 things from the Death and Life of Great American Cities by Jane Jacobs. Claire.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. So yeah, a little bit about the Death and Life of Great American Cities, just before I kind of get started proper. Hang on, sorry, that's my cat. Come on. Yeah, that's it. Okay, sorry about that. I knew that was going to happen. So just before we get started on the 5 things about the Death and Life of Great American Cities, I just wanted to provide a little bit of context about this book. It's a really important book that nobody's heard of. It was published in 1961, And it's basically a polemic that pushes against all the orthodox planning that was prevalent in the sort of 1960s and onward, and is still actually very prevalent in a lot of planning today. So just to put your mind into context, at this time in 1961, planning and city building was almost entirely composed of very powerful men. So if we think of very famous people like Le Corbusier or Robert Moses. And then Jane Jacobs came along, and she was this woman that had no planning or architecture qualifications at all. She came and she wrote this book and she published it, and she basically put the crosshairs on these very powerful men and their ideas. And at the time, it was absolutely incendiary, really a big deal. So there's a lot I could say about how amazing Jane Jacobs was, especially with respect to Robert Moses, but we don't have enough time for that today. But just to say, it's an absolute classic and it's still really relevant now, sort of 70 years later. So if we take the next slide. Thank you. So what is this book about? The book is about how cities really work. And it's beautifully written. It's really well written. It's very dense. There's a lot of stuff to cover in this book. And the arguments are backed up with a lot of evidence and stories, lots of vignettes, lots of anecdotes to illustrate her points and to kind of back up what she's talking about. And Jacobs wrote pretty much about American cities, which are interesting in their own, but our learnings can really be applied anywhere. So I've actually included some images throughout this presentation to help illustrate some of our points. And you can kind of decide by looking at them whether you think we're looking at good elements of cities or whether we're looking at bad elements of cities. So I'll let you decide that yourself. And that there's a lot more than 5 things to learn about within this book, but let's talk about some of my key takeaways. So the very first one. So modernism kills cities. And so when I talk about modernism kills cities, if you're not a big planning geek like me, not everybody's really going to understand what that means. So modern planning is very utopian, had a very utopian perspective. It was all about order. And until sort of modern planning came along, the city was considered very chaotic, a place where it bred disease and slums and all this kind of stuff. So modern planning was all about zoning. It was all about order and separation of uses. There was a great distaste of the street, and there was a very big focus on privacy. And as part of that, what we would see is a lot of catering to automobiles. So you can see in the middle image there, we've got the Glasgow motorway searing through the middle of the Glasgow city centre, which is a very modern way of thinking about things. And urban renewal was another big thing. So you can see that in the photo on the right-hand side. So urban renewal was where sort of inner city communities were razed to the ground and pushed out into new modern estates to give in that space, to give in that privacy, to give in the zoning. And what Jacobs argues really is that these ideas are basically in complete contradiction to what makes strong and healthy cities. And in fact, what they lead to, as she calls, is the great blight of dullness. And she talks about the great blight of dullness quite a lot through this book. And once you start getting in and around and about and start looking around, you're going to see a lot of the great blight of dullness all over the place. So what this means, what she's talking about, is a sort of homogeneity, lack of amenity, a lot of car dependency, a lot of urban sprawl, and lots of social isolation that is kind of born of all these things. So a lot of these modernist ideas are still with us today. They're so ubiquitous and embedded that we take them completely for granted and can't really see any other way to do things. It's almost like we cannot see the wood for the trees because it's so embedded in our everyday life. So that's the first thing. So if we move on to number 2. So this is quite a controversial thing. Many people did and still do find this deeply uncomfortable as a concept. Actually, Robert Moses is very famous for saying that cities are created by and for traffic. So when you say that traffic in healthy cities are incompatible, a lot of folk can't really get their head around this. They find this very difficult to understand because traffic in cities kind of go hand in hand. But what Jacobs argues really is that traffic only offers the erosion of cities. And we can kind of see this in this illustration, this picture that I've put up here. This is the same street across 3 different time periods. And I can let you decide which elements of time you think are the most enjoyable for people in the city. So when she talks about the erosion of cities, what she says is that This is something done by traffic, and it's initially very creeping and insidious. So you don't really realize at the start that this is happening, but it ends up snowballing. And we see this everywhere. So when she talks about things being creeping and insidious, she's talking about things like, well, you know, there's a lot of traffic that's trying to get along this road. So what we're going to have to do is widen the road a little bit to let more traffic through. Or we need to get more parking in place because, you know, we need to accommodate cars and vehicles. So we need to add more parking onto the street. We need to add more parking into the area. Or it's things like there's actually a lot of traffic trying to get along the street. So what we're going to have to do is kind of remove some of the crossings for pedestrians because the signalized crossings for pedestrians slows traffic down. Or things like the signalized pedestrian crossings are already here, but they're giving too much time for pedestrians because traffic's not been able to get across. So we need to shorten signals, make it harder for pedestrians to get across so that we can get more traffic flow. She talks about the gods of traffic flow. So what this does is creates a feedback loop, which is also known as induced demand. So whereby if you make things more accommodating for automobiles, more people drive. So streets become more congested. So you need more road width and you need more parking and you need more signals and you need more roads. So it just keeps going and it keeps snowballing and getting bigger and bigger. So this is what she's talking about when she says that they're incompatible. And the alternative to this that Jacobs has is called the attrition of automobiles. What she talks about is the idea to make it less convenient for people to drive. And there's many, many different ways to achieve this. In the book, she says it hardly ever happens, which I would agree is absolutely accurate until recently, when we're starting to see this in cities. Only 70 years later, 70 years after Jane Jacobs talks about how it's kind of important not to have traffic overwhelming cities, we're starting to think about that now. So you can see how important this book is in context. So if we move on from that, the third thing about healthy cities is that density is absolutely key. And lots of people already know this, you know, it's not like a big wow, but why is density so important in cities? A lot of people would say density is important because real estate is expensive. So we need to build high in order to accommodate that, which has got an element of truth about it. And that is correct. But what Jacobs argues is that density is vital to help support non-essential functions, which is what brings the city its vibrancy and joy. So she talks about how in low density areas, only functions that the majority of people require will be catered to. So if you're in a low density area, you'll see things like supermarkets and you'll see things like doctors, and these things all exist and they're all there for people. But what you don't get in low density areas, what you do get in the city, is that you don't get strange, unusual or interesting things. And that is what makes the city so important. It's absolutely vital. That's one of the key elements that Jacobs argues for. So you won't see museums or galleries or theatres or specialist retailers or weird little shops or strange things going on or interesting stuff, because without high density, it just can't be supported. And density is also vital for walkability. Walkability is one of the most important things for cities to be healthy. So that leads me on to my next point. Thank you. Where Jane talks a lot about streets, and she talks about how streets are a city's vital organs. And when she's talking about streets, what she's talking about density. So she says that cities should have lots of streets, loads and loads of streets that cross-fertilize each other. So they should create a dense network of walkability so people can sort of cross-fertilize. And she says that healthy streets are absolutely vital to feel safe in a city. And again, this is not like rocket science, but she kind of digs down deeper into it to kind of give you a feeling of why this is important. What is it that makes a street feel safe? And she talks about how this is all about eyes on the street. And this is a very key argument for her. She talks about how eyes on the street are it's sort of the wisdom of crowds. It's what makes streets feel safe. So this is both on the street itself and also from surrounding buildings. So people that are living in their houses, looking out the window, or people that are in their offices or people at work or whatever, having a nose, having a little scooch at what's going on in the street. And she says that the only way for this really to happen is that pavements and sidewalks and streets have to have people on them throughout the day and night. They need to be vibrant, they need to be alive, they need to be interesting. They should really be 30 feet wide, which is 9 meters. And when we look at Edinburgh, our sort of average pavement width is about 2 meters. So this kind of puts into context what Jane Jacobs is talking about and how important streets are for city health. She talks about places to sit and dwell, places for people to congregate and chat, spaces for children to play, which is something that feels so obscene to people nowadays, that the idea that children might play on the street is just like, because of the erosion of our cities, is something that is considered these days very difficult to kind of wrap your head around. And she talks also about public characters. And public characters are people that are on the street who are sort of well connected. They know everything that's going on. They've got all the chat, they've got all the banter. They know people on the street. They know businesses on the street. And often public characters are people like, so maybe bartenders or shop owners, corner shop owners, things like that. And they're really important. And so too often streets are treated like roads. The main function is to move traffic. And this is a complete failure of city building, basically. When roads are given, or when streets are given priority to traffic over people, that in her view is a complete failure of city building. And you can see a couple of illustrations there just to kind of back up what she's talking about, which spaces feel more welcoming for people, and you can kind of decide off the back of that what makes a street important. And so that leads me on to point number 4. Wait, that is point number 4. Point number 5, sorry. Jacobs, one of her key arguments is that organized complexity brings cities to life. And Jacobs talks about this with reference to the street. Now, obviously, cities are complex places, and it's very obvious to anybody that cities are not straightforward, unless you speak to modernist planners who think that, zoning and order and separation and that's what a city is. But actually, what a city is chaos and disruption, and that's what makes a great city. And Jacobs talks about this in an organized complexity perspective. And she's talking specifically about diversity here. Now, she's applying this to the street, remember, not the city as a whole. She talks about diversity of people. So on the street, we need to have people with different economic backgrounds, people with different skills that come from different places, have different nationalities and perspectives. She talks about diversity of buildings, so both old and new. And this is because we need to accommodate people from different socioeconomic backgrounds. So new buildings tend to be more expensive than old buildings, not always, but that's sort of the general gist of things. And you need to have that mixture. She talks about diversity of architectural styles. And this is something to tackle monotony, which we also know as the great blight of dullness from Jacobs. So this is something she talks about a lot. And one of the most important key takeaways that she talks about is diversity of function. So mixtures of residential, commercial, office space, retail, green space, culture, nightlife, light industrial, so that the area is used throughout the day and the night. So we have those mixtures, we have that presence on the street throughout different parts of the day. Now, I would say in Edinburgh in particular, a lot of that doesn't happen. So we think about things like business districts, or we think about things like cultural quarters or residential areas. We don't think about things really having that mixture and things being kind of blended together to give that real vibrancy and joy that you get from mixtures and diversity in the city. And what she talks about is how all these ingredients need to be present. They need to be all there in order for the street to be fed, for districts in the city to be fed and be given the nourishment that it needs. So these are 5 key takeaways. Here we go. Ooh. So modernism kills cities. Traffic in healthy cities are incompatible. Density is key. Streets are a city's vital organs, and organized complexity brings cities to life. Thanks.
That was wonderfully interesting. Thanks so much, Claire. Round of applause, and a round of applause for all 3 speakers today. It has made me really think about, well, the design of our city, but like streets and even like urban ones. In a sense, I don't get the sense that they're actually for living on. They're very functional. They're for travel and for cars, and makes me think of one of the biggest things I've missed while I live in Edinburgh over the last couple of years is the festival. And I really love when the streets are actually used for living on, so when they close them to those sort of functional aspects. I don't know if anyone else has that sort of similar sense. Mark's got thumbs up. I bet you've got an opinion on this.
Well, the naysayers who say Edinburgh is a nightmare during the festival, I mean, they need to get their heads examined, don't they? It's the most exciting place on the planet. And it's not necessarily what's happening in theatres or in bars. It's just walking about the streets. Okay, you get held up at traffic lights a bit more, but you know, it's social intercourse, isn't it? And it's exciting. It's you know, it's pretty much all of those things that you've just, those 5 things that you've said, they all kind of happen at the same time. It just becomes, the city is alive, in my opinion. I love it.
Yes, yeah, I think that is exactly my sort of, or my sense is that the city is alive. It's not just about for, you know, getting from place A to place B. There's lots of activity and a hive of, you know, energy. Yeah. I was going to go back to a point you made, Mark, as well, and one that resonates very strongly with me. I think you said society drums creativity out of you when you're at school, and it's quite a funny thing actually, because creativity, and probably a lot of the places that folks work in today, is one of the most sought after skills in today's workplace. But yeah, it's not encouraged at school, is it? You know, you're
Well,
learning
it's
encouraged.
because teaching, a lot of teaching teaches convention. You have to comply with, you know, the syllabus, the rules, the norms. STEM subjects are very rules orientated. They're seen as well, they're better paid. They're seen as more aspirational, and so children who are very, very creative to start out with just gradually have doors closed as their lives go on. And that's why, you know, something like Daydream Believers that we're doing at Whitespace, I think, is really important, because it brings secondary school kids together into a classroom environment that isn't teaching any of the disciplines of the arts subjects. So there's no syllabus. Having said that, the SQA, where it's still around, have endorsed it, and Daydream Believers is now being taken to various countries in the world. And it's just about encouraging creativity without any doors, and to think in creative ways, which you could then inspire those kids to think, you know, I could have a career in creativity. I don't have to do those STEM subjects, because a lot of them, those kids aren't that academic, and so they get scared by school. So if you're taught pure creativity and just thinking in a creative way, you realize that there's more potential in life, and there's kind of potentially more interesting things to do. I mean, I did a science degree, so I'm not decrying science, but I find creativity much more stimulating.
Mm-hmm. So it's a shame in the sense that creativity is constrained, or can be constrained to art or writing, or the sort of subjects that come, you know, to mind when you're thinking about creativity. But I think there's creativity in science and business.
Oh yeah.
And you know, one of the things that I value most, you know, when either hiring folks or working with folks, is just thinking differently, and I'd call that creativity. And that is the thing that's drummed out of folks fairly quickly, but probably one of the most essential skills in today's and tomorrow's workplace.
Yeah,
that's my TED talk. Alex, I was just going back to reasons to stay alive, which, so thanks so much for sharing that, and your personal journey with that.
You're welcome.
Don't know if I've sort of noticed a pattern, which I think is very healthy. The pandemic, you know, it's obviously caused a lot of issues, but it's also, you know, positively may have encouraged folks to be a little bit more mindful of their mental health before it actually becomes a severe problem. Don't know if you've noticed that as a young person.
I think it's really good to see, and I think now, I think personally for me, I, you know, we kind of dealt with mental health from, you know, things that I dealt with over the pandemic, but then I started to deal with things that I probably should have dealt with years ago as well, you know, like, you know, just like things like stress at work and workload and stuff like that I kind of always felt. But then I think, yeah, from a young person's point of view, you know, I feel like in the last few times of being in the pub, like I regularly talk about mental health and people are talking about what support they've got and what support they need. And, you know, it just feels like a very, very different conversation now as opposed to, you know, 2 years ago where everybody was kind of like, you know, quite private about it. It feels much more of an open discussion. So I think that's one of the good things to come out of the pandemic, but I suppose a lot of people have gone through a very hard process to get to that point.
Yeah, that's it's a really cool thing, and it's a really encouraging sign to see in young creatives, you know, having mental health front of mind. So do you think that's sort of pattern you see with peers as well, or?
Yeah, definitely. And I think actually that, like, you know, I'm thinking of, I went for a drink with someone who I went to school with, who is now a teacher herself, and, you know, how they're talking about that within teaching. And, you know, like, I think as well, around my own business, you know, I can do things like not get up in the dark if I choose to, but there's, you know, if you're in a big organization like being a teacher, then you're probably quite constrained to quite a lot of things. And so it's then like, well, how do you make that work for you? And yeah, I think it's a very interesting but hard thing for lots of different people to do. And I think I'm quite grateful for the fact that I can make a lot of those choices myself because I work for myself. And I think as a self-employed person, or a lot of self-employed people put themselves down a lot and must do this, can't take a holiday. But actually we can make those choices, so we totally should. So, yeah.
Sounds healthy. It sort of combines with one of the points Mark brought up as well. You know, if you're not being that sort of beacon of energy, you know, that is very sort of attractive for clients as well, then you probably won't be so successful.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Well, as normal, there's probably too many questions, not enough time. I'd love to have dug into a lot of the things we brought up today. But yeah, a final round of applause for our three wonderful speakers. That was another really interesting session. So thanks again so much to you three and everyone for joining the call this morning as well. We'll hopefully be back in November with another 3 books, but we'll finish up there. So thanks again, folks.
And thanks, Andy.
Bye. Bye.